Hi, so today we're going to talk about a thing that just bothered me recently. I did a poll, you might have voted in it, where I asked, is a whole note worth two half notes or is it worth one measure? And 75% of people on YouTube agreed with me that it was worth two half notes and not just a whole measure. And so the 25% of people that didn't agree might have been assuming 4/4, in which case, yeah, it's the same answer. But in not 4/4, I think that's crazy. And I think some percentage of those 25%, some proportion of them actually are disagreeing with me. And so I don't understand your logic. Maybe you could, comment and argue with me a little bit, but I think it should always be that a whole note is 2 halves, 4 quarters, 8 eighths, 16 sixteenths. I don't see how there's any way that that shouldn't be true. I'm not saying that it isn't. I think there are examples in literature where a whole note is a whole measure no matter what the time signature, but I'm just saying that's insane. That messes up the whole system, and if you're writing music, you shouldn't do it. I also did the same poll on Facebook, got 100% of my musician friends to agree with me. It's always 2 half notes and not one measure, because of course, any other time signature other than 4/4, 2/2, 1/1, 16/16, any other time signature that's not the same number twice, you don't have 8 eighth notes, you don't have 4 quarters, you don't have 2 halves to work with. You either have more or you have less, and it doesn't make any sense. So we're going to look at it over here, and I've got some stuff written out that I can hopefully demonstrate this to people who are naysaying. But I'm also not saying that it's never happened in literature. I'll show you an example that was reportedly from Rachmaninoff. I've never seen it in person, but someone told me that it's true. But I still think that even though Rachmaninoff's great, if he used a whole note for anything other than 8 eighth notes or 2 half notes, that he did it wrong. It's crazy, and he should have thought of a different way. And maybe he was just lazy and not crazy, but like, come on, man. So anyway, I know it's a minor thing and it's like a semantic difference, but it makes a difference to me as a percussionist because rhythm is all that I do. I don't really do notes very often. I don't play keyboards a whole lot. So duration is everything, and if you mess up the counting, you're really screwing with the only thing that I care about. So, all right, check this out. So let me spell out my case here a little bit. In the 4/4 time signature, the whole note takes up all 4 beats, the entire measure. This is a complete measure for this voice. It also is equivalent to 2 half notes. Also 4 quarter notes, also 8 eighth notes, also 16 sixteenth notes, 32 30-seconds. You get where I'm going with this. Every denomination works out this way. It also works with triplets, 12 eighth triplets, 24 16th triplets work out to one whole note, and it fills an entire 4/4 measure. But this is only true in time signatures where the top and bottom number are the same. 1/1 time, 2/2 time, which is also the same as cut time, right? Common time, right? You could have 16/16 time, right? And any of these, this would be true. It would be 4 beats, and it would be the full measure. However, it's not always true. If we change to a measure of 3/4, now only a dotted half note fills up the measure because there are only 1, 2, 3 counts, right? If we put a whole note in here, that is 4 counts, and it wouldn't fit. So that is wrong from a theoretical and logical standpoint. Now, some people will do this. They'll put a whole note in a 3/4 measure to equal 3 beats. They'll just assume that it means the whole measure, which I think is just sort of a nomenclature issue. It is a fallacy of logic based on a weird name for this thing. If we called this something else, I don't think anyone would think you could do that. But the reason that doesn't make sense is because if you put a whole note in here to mean all 3 of these beats, that means that when you put it in half to a regular half note, that each regular half note was worth a dotted quarter note. And that means that now the dotted quarter note really is redundant. It also means that the dotted half note is redundant because it's being taken up by a whole note. So you've just taken away some of the possible choices of note and made them redundant by messing with the value of the initial whole note. That doesn't make sense to me. So here's what Rachmaninoff apparently did. I've never checked this, but someone said this. So let's look at the 12/8 time signature. For example, in 12/8, you've got 12 eighth notes. So usually people break this into threes, and so to do that, if you put dotted quarters, those are worth 3 eighth notes because the dot adds 50% of the value, right? So 3, 6, 9, 12. You can also make that into 2 dotted half notes and 1 dotted whole note. The whole thing, the system works logically as long as you dot everything, because then everything comes out to 12 instead of 8 as far as eighth notes, because 4, 4 would be 8, 8, right? And 12, 8 is 50% more than that. So adding 50% to everything works out perfectly. What I was told Rachmaninoff did, and I haven't checked this myself, but is that he put a whole note to mean 3 of those dotted quarters and then 1 dotted quarter left over. That's insane, because this is 8 eighth notes normally, and this is 3. 8 plus 3 is only 9, 10, 11, right? So we're missing an eighth note in this scenario. Obviously, if you saw this measure, you'd have to assume, okay, I guess he means that this is actually a dotted half note tied to a dotted quarter note, or 3 dotted quarter notes tied to each other. But it doesn't logically make sense. And so if you're to tell people somehow that you can change the value of a whole note, that really just screws up the entire rhythm denomination system. It shouldn't be allowed. I don't think it's right, and I don't think it makes any sense. This rhythm here, dotted half tied to a dotted quarter, is what he wanted, but he was apparently too lazy or too illogical or ignorant to write that. I don't know. I don't want to badmouth Rachmaninoff because he's amazing, but that just doesn't make sense. And maybe I'm hoping that the person who told me that was lying to me, but I don't know for sure. So just to recap, and I think that 3/4 at least of people already agree with me, your whole note is 2 halves, is 4/4, is 8 eighths. There's no way around this. This is just all the time, no matter what time signature you're in. So if you're in 6/8 and you want to fill up the measure, it's a dotted half note. If you're in 9/8 and you want to fill up the measure, it either has to be some combination of tied notes, or I guess technically you could put a whole note under a bracket and put a 9 over it in like a tuplet and say this features 1 whole note in 9 tuplet notation, and that would technically make that whole note true for this, but that's an insane thing to do. Now I'll show you the most insane thing that I've ever seen written out. The most insane thing I've ever seen written out was 2 5 tuplets bracketed into a triplet, and honestly I don't even know how that would sound, so I don't have the answer to everything. But apparently doing brackets of triplets or whatever over top of things, or putting the number 5 to equal that these go in one beat, is a way to just apparently defy all the laws. And so if you're going to do that, fine, and then you can do the math and figure out how fast these would actually be. But you can't just do this. You cannot have a measure of like 13, 16 time, throw a whole note in there and say, bam, 1 measure. Because there's no way on earth that's equaling 13, because then half notes are suddenly, what, 6 1/2? Quarter notes are 3 1/4. So that doesn't even make any sense. That's all I'm saying. Please, if you're writing music out for any particular reason or composing, a whole note is worth 4 counts. 2 halves, not the entire measure. Thank you. I'll see you guys next time.